Cyberpunk. My tragic, tragic love story. Everyone keeps telling me to hate you, and yet I just can't. This game is simply too good for me not to like it, and I'm not saying that to downplay the criticisms of the game or the broken promises made by developers. I'm just saying it because, damn man, I had a blast playing this game for well over 300 hours, and I can't in good faith call a game this good a disappointment. In Cyberpunk, you'll find plenty of bugs. That much is definitely true, even after all of the patches. But beyond what for me were minor bugs lay a tremendously powerful narrative with some incredibly heavy-hitting story beats, a city with a pulse, a protagonist who I can only describe as one of the coolest motherfuckers I have ever played as, and some of the most well-written characters I've ever had the pleasure of getting to know. But to get a real understanding for why I like this game so much and why I'm willing to look past so many of its shortcomings, we should really get in at the start. This is what makes Cyberpunk 2077 so good. The hype train for Cyberpunk 2077 was, to put it mildly, off the motherfucking rails on a runaway mad dash of cocaine-driven ecstasy. And, like I said, that is putting it mildly. CD Projekt Red executed one of the most successful marketing campaigns for a video game ever. The only problem was, well, CD Projekt Red has lofty ambitions. It's what led them to slowly transform the Witcher franchise from a standard action RPG into the genre-redefining masterpiece it is known as today. The problem with these ambitions is that, well, CDPR just kept promising and promising and promising. Each new interview led to hype off of previously unmentioned features of the game. Bold assertions were made in just about every single area of this game's development. The only issue? Cyberpunk 2077 needed an entirely upgraded and brand new engine to be developed. The one that worked for The Witcher 3 wouldn't work for Cyberpunk, because among many other distinct differences, Cyberpunk is an FPS. In truth, Cyberpunk 2077 was an entirely new kind of project for CDPR, and their ambition wound up biting them hard in the ass as development timetables were lapsed upon time and time again. Due dates were pushed back. First, the game got hit with an almost half-year delay. Then it got hit with a second delay, at which point delays started becoming part of the norm. But in order to curb the memes and jokes that were being made at the constant delays, the Twitter account for Cyberpunk 2077 then promptly publicly issued a statement that there would be no more delays in the future. Anyways, the game got delayed again, pushing the release date back to December 10th. Not exactly a good way to start a launch, but the hype was admittedly still frothing at the mouth with expectations that had been carefully fomented over almost a decade of marketing and development updates. People didn't just want to play Cyberpunk 2077, they wanted to be Cyberpunk 2077. And as the due date came ever closer, Gabriel's horn began to sound. Now, before I continue, I just want to bring some attention to some comic books I've been developing for the past year. They're all free to read on my website, thenightlibrary.net, and since I won't ever take a sponsor on this channel, well, my own self-plugs are as close to that as we'll get. Liking, subscribing, you know the gig. Help me out however you can, and that would be Nova. Anyways, back to Cyberpunk. With the due date right around the corner, pre-orders for Cyberpunk were through the roof and to the goddamn moon. 8 million, with even more on the way. And then the game released. And, well, that much is history. I'll let the internet historian handle this bit whenever he inevitably makes his video recapping this whole saga. It's safe to say the game released in a piss-poor condition for millions of folk, namely console gamers, who, upon downloading their game and starting it up, experienced at best a game comparable to a Bethesda launch title and, at worst, a completely broken product that simply couldn't be played. What happened to the 8 years of development time? What happened to the dozens of ambitious promises and lofty goals? Well, for starters, Cyberpunk wasn't actually in development for 8 years. It was actually announced 4 years before development was able to begin. However, I don't really blame people for not knowing this, and announcing a game before you've developed any of it is certainly a ballsy move, to put it nicely. Man, look, for what it's worth, I absolutely have no doubt that CD Projekt Red planned to have a bunch of the features they promised in the game at some point. Hell, I'd be willing to bet that a bunch of these features are still going to be added into the game as DLC at some point in the future. I'm willing to give CDPR the benefit of the doubt here because they're traditionally a company that doesn't screw over consumers as much as it seems like they have this time. I mean, I honestly don't remember the last time a AAA developer gave me free DLC over and over and over again. I mean, I'm used to having to buy my horse its fucking armor, for Christ's sake. But admittedly, wholesome or not, the issue still remains. A lot of these promised features just weren't present at launch, and the game itself was really just not ready for release. You all probably know the story well from this point: the memes, the hate, the hacking. CDPR's name was dragged through the mud along with their new game, and for once in the company's life, they were the bad guys. I say all this first and foremost to set the stage, so to speak. I want people to know and remember the circumstances of this game's release, and more importantly, I want people to know why, even despite this, I still think this game is one of the greatest I've ever played. You see, I was fortunate enough to play this game on a pretty damn good PC at launch, and as a result, I really didn't experience more than your occasional T-pose or the admittedly hilarious butt-naked motorcycle ride. This allowed me to experience the game in as close to ideal state as possible at the time, and it allowed me to do so without breaking my immersion, for the most part. These conditions set the stage for my first real introduction into the cyberpunk video game genre. I've seen plenty of cyberpunk stories, like Ghost in the Shell and Blade Runner, but I never really had the privilege of getting to play them. Now, the cyberpunk genre is, for the most part, one of the best mediums by which a transhumanism or humanist story can be told. This is important to note because of all of the things I loved about Cyberpunk, the game's endings and the varied ways things can turn out left me speechless for a few days. The story being told here is so beautiful, so sad, so happy, so human. And I love that arguably most about this game. For those of you who don't know, a transhumanism story is one in which the primary question that is asked, and hopefully in some way meaningfully addressed by the end of the story, is something along the lines of the following. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to have a soul? At what point does a human stop being a human, and at what point does something distinctly not human become human? And so on. Those questions of identity and existential purpose. Cyberpunk's setting is, of course, a brilliant atmosphere for such a question to be asked. I mean, just one glance at the violent, superficial, and heavily augmented culture that rules over Night City poses this question to its audience. For example, is Lizzie Wizzy, the world's most famous pop star, still human? She's replaced nearly all of her human body with machine parts. Even her skin is made of chrome. Contrarily, is Delamain, an AI that is allowed to operate its own taxi agency under strict provisions, in fact something that we could call human, or at the very least deserving of human rights? He speaks, talks, and even schemes like one, but most importantly, he exhibits a true sense of free will and, dare I say it, develops a true friendship. Obviously, such a setting is perfect for telling this kind of story. However, the writers took it several steps further by introducing Johnny Silverhand in the way that they did. A quick warning, I'll be giving what I consider to be light spoilers for this game, however, it's nothing that CDPR themselves hasn't already said in promotional material, so keep that in mind. After a series of incredibly tension-riddled and action-packed events, the digital quote-unquote soul of Johnny Silverhand a decades-old punk rocker with a prickly personality, is implanted into your own brain, causing hallucinations and Johnny's consciousness to manifest in powerful and sometimes surprising ways. Johnny's personality has been stored and implanted via an engram, meaning it's a completely digital construct that captured a digital image, so to speak, of Johnny's consciousness and personality. Think of it like scanning someone's brain and consciousness into a machine. There are no human parts of Johnny in you, so to speak, and his personality, while certainly lifelike and interesting to say the least, is an entirely non-organic construct. Thus begs the question, does Johnny have a soul? And if he does, are you currently interacting with it in some way? Is he really a person, a human being, or is he just a really convincing copy of someone who was? What about V, the main character? Even before you meet Johnny, it's already made very clear that V has dozens, if not hundreds, of physical augmentations that have been done to his or her body. His eyes are replaced with Kiroshi optics. His arms have been embedded with wires and structures that can facilitate hacking, both computers and people, both literally and figuratively. Who's to say the face you see when you customize your character at the beginning of the game is even the one V was born with, and not just some mechanical faceplate that has been soldered on? Is V still a human being if his or her whole body has been replaced with machine parts? And what the hell does all of this mean when you throw Johnny into the mix? We already know that V and Johnny are slowly merging with each other as a result of the relic malfunctions, but what does that mean when you look at their two respective souls? Are two souls merging? Does Johnny's construct even have a soul? Do V or Johnny even exist, or have they become something new entirely? A brand new person with a new soul and a new personality? Things get complicated to say the least, and that existential question is ever present in every single aspect of the main story, and most of the side quests too. To me, this is a masterful demonstration of a transhumanist story put in arguably the best setting for such a story to be told, which is only amplified by having the main narrative be integrally tied to this question from the ground up, and in more ways than just one. The main story for this game astounded me. It took my breath away and left me speechless. It humbled me and made me really respect those in the development team who poured so much effort and active care into this game. But most importantly, it left me profoundly entertained. Now, from a story perspective, I could talk about Cyberpunk all day, but in the hopes that I don't spoil anything for you and this video convinces even just one person to play this game, I'll leave it at that. However, in good faith, I can't ignore a critical aspect of this game's success, in my opinion. It's time for a little reminder. Remember when I said Cyberpunk 2077 was CDPR's first ever attempt at an FPS? Yeah, I want you to remember that as you see some of this gameplay, because Cyberpunk 2077 has some of the most satisfying and visceral combat that I've ever had the immense pleasure of getting to toy around with. Everything from pistols to shotguns to assault rifles to monowires and good old-fashioned katanas are present in Cyberpunk. And each weapon, augmentation, and hacking daemon serves to enhance an already incredibly versatile combat system. Guns shake and bounce with recoil, making even rudimentary shots challenging, and melee weapons deliver powerful, silent, and satisfying blows to all those who come close enough to taste them. The carnage, the brutality, the potential for totally unique situations, and the versatile and nearly endless ways in which you can approach them given the tools available in the game. I mean, we're strictly talking about gunplay here, but even in the context of missions and the ways you can approach certain objectives, this game seems to specialize in offering dozens of different ways to play certain missions out. Perhaps you can use a technical skill to open a door, or maybe you just use your strength to brute force open the garage. Maybe you want to use some of Cyberpunk's woefully underhyped parkour mechanics to scale the building and hop in through an open window. Do you want to be loud and kill everyone you see, or silent, leaving not a hair out of place as you sneak in and sneak out? The physical abilities afforded to the player in Cyberpunk really make this game's replayability skyrocket, as different skill sets unlock alternative ways by which missions can be approached. Let's go ahead and have another reminder that this is CDPR's very first FPS, and the combat is already so rounded that I've personally invested hundreds of hours into it. But gameplay and narrative aside, I'd be doing this game a disservice if I didn't talk about Cyberpunk's actual setting, aka the city in which the game takes place, and the world building that is oh so skillfully implemented to bring the entire thing to life. Night City is a beating neon heart of humanity's most solemn sins and vilest of pleasures. The city streets come alive with all the ads, billboards, music, chatter, and gossip that one might expect from a post-apocalyptic free state such as Night City. Gang goons spit out unique and effortless slang as you walk by, mocking you or someone they recently had a run-in with. Chooms come and go as life's harsh revolving door speeds up around you. Sokka goons, Tinos, dolls, and netrunners, everywhere you look in Night City, there's something that's gonna look back at you. Whether it's a reverent monk seeking enlightenment in the dark heart of humanity, or a sentient soda machine with an open shoulder to cry on. All of this to simply say, the world building that the writers employed to bring this monstrosity of a city to life captivated me to no end. As someone who calls themselves a writer, to see this much dedication to the smallest details delights me, and every single time I learned a new word or was exposed to a new concept or faction, I only fell in love with this game even more. Now, I know a lot of criticisms for this game stem from the broken promises, or a generally god-awful launch, but if there's one thing you could take away from this video, it's that someday, at some point, just try Cyberpunk 2077. Either for the first time or for a second chance. Release yourself from expectations and just see what you get from the experience. I got well over 300 hours of fun gameplay, tons of inspiration, and a story that has profoundly affected me. And if you ask me, that's a pretty goddamn good use of $60. And that, well, that is what makes Cyberpunk 2077 so good.